As a kid, I watched a lot of kids' movies from the late 90s to early 2000s. Films such as the Pixar films, Disney films, DreamWorks films, a lot of animated films, but really just whatever kids' movies were out at the time. So I watched shit like Dr. Dolittle and stuff. But even when I was little, the films that I wanted to watch the most were the big grand action movies. And I don't mean stuff like Die Hard or Lethal Weapon. I mean things like Star Wars and Tim Burton's Batman. But there's one film I think I watched more than all of them. Well, maybe not more than Star Wars. And that was Back to the Future. It's one of the Steven Spielberg movies that I always loved as a kid, which also includes E.T., The Goonies, Hook, Harry and the Hendersons, and tons of other films that he was either an executive producer on or the director of. Back to the Future was always my favourite because of how much it opened my imagination to the idea of time travel. It doesn't give you any complicated theories or anything like they did in Donnie Darko. Instead, it's all left to your imagination. You don't get told how the flux capacitor works, it can work however you want it to work. Growing up, whenever I watch it, I get to see it with different eyes every time. It does get better every time I watch it, and I appreciate it more for what it is and how well made it really is. The plot is probably one everybody basically already knows, but I'll go over it anyway. Marty McFly is a teenage boy who's basically a rebel and the most different person in his family. His dad is a shy, geeky guy who always lets people boss him around, and his mum is kind of a prude who is telling Marty what he can't do, and his siblings are just like normal people. Marty hangs around with a scientist called Doc Brown. Doc tells Marty to meet him at the Twin Pines Mall because he has a new invention to show him. When Marty gets there, he's shown a DeLorean sports car. Doc puts his dog Einstein in the car and sends him forward 1 minute into the future. Then a group of Libyan terrorists come along and gun down Doc because he stole plutonium from them. Marty panics and drives away in the DeLorean and gets sent back in time to 1955. Marty goes into a local diner to use the telephone and accidentally meets his dad when he's trying to find out the location of Doc Brown. Marty follows his dad and sees him fall out of a tree and almost get hit by a car. Marty saves his dad just before he gets hit and subsequently gets hit by the car instead. The problem with this is the person driving the car is actually Marty's grandfather. Marty's grandfather was meant to hit Marty's dad, which then leaves him to meeting Marty's mother and falling in love. But Marty takes the place of Marty's dad and his mother ends up having the hots for him. Marty meets Doc and convinces him about the time machine. The rest of the film is Marty and Doc trying to send Marty back to 1985, Marty trying to hook his parents up, and also trying to avoid all the obstacles that are being set by Biff, the local bully who fancies Marty's mother. God, I'm gonna get sick of saying Marty. This leads to an extremely climactic final act that remains one of the greatest final acts in film history. The final part of the movie is incredibly exciting and I really do get goosebumps every time I see it, and trust me, I've seen this movie a lot of times. Back to the Future is one of those films that people who grew up in the 80s or any time since watched when they were a little kid. Despite the fact that the characters say shit every minute or so, the film is one that I'm sure a lot of parents would be happy showing to their kids. When I was young, I was very imaginative. Not that I am not now, but I was much more back then. Back to the Future opened me up to time travel and weird inventions, which is probably one of the reasons that I also used to watch Dexter's Laboratory a lot. That's why even watching the film now, I absolutely adore it. I'm taken back to when I was a little kid and when I used to watch it and imagine what some of the things would be like. This is also one of the reasons that I love Star Wars so much. Back to the Future is one of the most interesting movies I think I've ever seen, because instead of explaining every tiny bit of equipment and how it works, it leaves it all up to the imagination. Similar to what 7 did. I mean, that 7, there's tons of kills, but you never actually see them. You have to imagine what they could have been like. If you took this aspect of the film out, that wouldn't take away from the fact that it's still a really good, well-made film. The acting is top-notch and everyone gives superb performances, especially Christopher Lloyd, who gives one of my favourite performances ever captured on film. If you simply watched the film and focused on him all throughout, you'd probably find yourself viewing something completely different. He just completely escapes in the character of Doc Brown, even when he hasn't got any lines to say, and watching him, even when he's not speaking, is just incredibly fun. The film is also meant to be a comedy, and in the comedic department it definitely succeeds. I'm not going to say that it's one of the funniest movies I've ever seen, but it's still a really funny film. The action scenes are absolutely phenomenal, and every single one is more exciting and riveting than the last. Everything that happens in the film has a purpose, and is brought up somewhere else in the film, which I just love. The special effects remain one of the highlights of the film. I don't know how many times I've seen this film, but every time I watch it I'm still dazzled by the effects, especially since there was no CGI back in the 80s. Industrial Light and Magic just completely knocked it out of the park with this one, and although it's not as groundbreaking or breathtaking as something like Star Wars or even Poltergeist, it still holds up almost 30 years later. The film launched a franchise with 2 fantastic sequels, an animated series that I really badly want to watch, a bunch of video games including one fantastic game from Telltale Games that I hugely recommend, I'm actually playing at the moment, comic books, and also an upcoming West End musical. Back to the Future is easily in my top 5 favourite films of all time. It's exciting, hilarious, well written, dazzling, and it gets better every time I watch it. It's definitely cemented its place into pop culture, and I look forward to seeing how time affects the popularity of the movies. I give Back to the Future a well-deserved A++.